I changed 6 words at the top of a spreadsheet my husband built for our retirement. Changed the header to Carol's numbers. Kept everything else exactly as he'd made it. That took me an hour. I'm 69. I retired on the date Frank and I had picked together, 2 years after he died. The pension was there, the survivor benefit was there, the paid-off house was there. The plan was completely ready. What I was not ready for had nothing to do with any of those things. There's a second list, the parts nobody puts in the retirement brochure. That's the one I want to talk about. Good morning. I've got my tea. It's a cool morning here in Greenville, which at this time of year feels like a small gift. And I want to talk about something today that I've been turning over in my mind for a while. Something I think about every time I get a message from someone who's just retired or about to, and they say, "I thought I was prepared." My name is Carol. I'm 69 years old. And I want to ask you something before I get into this. When you imagine retirement, or when you imagined it if you're already here, what did you think was going to be different? What did you think you were ready for? I thought I was ready. I'd been a teacher for 20 years, a curriculum coordinator for 16 more. I had my pension from the school district. I had my Social Security, the widow's survivor benefit, which I started at 67. I had Medicare. I had a paid-off house. I had a date on the calendar that Frank and I had picked together years before he died. March 2021. I kept the date. It felt like keeping a promise, even though the other half of the promise wasn't there to keep it with me. The plan was ready. The finances were ready. The retirement was ready. What I was not ready for had nothing to do with any of those things. There is a list of things people tell you about retirement. The money, the Medicare, the routine you're supposed to build, the purpose you're supposed to find. I had read about all of those. I had thought about all of those. And then there's a second list, a completely different list, of the parts that show up on an ordinary Tuesday when you're not expecting them. Nobody gave me that list. I want to try to give it to you today. Here's the specific thing I want to name, because I think it doesn't get said clearly enough. You wake up. There's no alarm. The house is quiet. And you reach for the routine, the structure of the day, the shape of the hours, and you find that the routine you thought you had doesn't quite fit. Not because it's wrong, because it was designed for 2 people and you are one. That's not the same as grief. I want to be clear about that. Grief I knew. Grief I'd been living with for 2 years by the time I retired. This was something else, something quieter and more practical, and in some ways more disorienting. It was the discovery that every small decision of the day, where to have breakfast, whether to run the errand now or later, what counts as a good use of a Wednesday, had been, for 43 years, a conversation. And now it wasn't. And the silence where that conversation used to be had a texture I wasn't expecting. I don't have a 5-step solution to offer you. I don't have a system. What I have is 3 years of figuring this out in real time. What helped, what didn't, what Frank would have said about all of it, which would probably have been more useful than anything I managed to figure out on my own. That's what I want to share today. So I'm at the kitchen table. This is a few weeks after I retired. Frank's notebook is open in front of me, the one he kept on his laptop, the retirement spreadsheet he built when we started planning seriously. He was a civil engineer for 35 years. He built the spreadsheet the way he built everything, with columns for every variable, rows for every year, a separate tab for the national park list with estimated driving times and best seasons to visit. I had looked at this spreadsheet many times while he was alive. I knew what was in it. I knew the numbers. What I didn't know was how to edit it. Not technically. I knew how to open a spreadsheet. What I mean is I sat there for a long time and I couldn't figure out where to start. Every column had been written with 2 people in mind. Every line of the budget said "we" in the logic of it, even where it didn't say the word. The travel budget, the grocery estimate, the line he'd called incidentals, which I always thought was an engineering word for things Carol buys that I didn't anticipate. I eventually changed the header. I typed Carol's numbers where it used to say something else. And I kept everything else exactly as he'd built it because I didn't know yet what needed to change and what didn't. That took me about an hour, changing 6 words at the top of a document. And when I was done, I sat back and I thought, I am retired. I have my pension, I have my survivor benefit, I have Medicare, I have this house that Frank insisted we pay off in 2018, which I am grateful for every single month. The infrastructure is here. The plan is here. But the plan was written for a version of this that no longer exists. And I was going to have to figure out what version I was actually living in. I didn't know how long that was going to take. I still don't think I'm entirely done. So I want to go through 5 things I've found, 5 parts of retirement that I was not prepared for, and that I don't think anybody talks about with enough honesty. Not the big things, the specific, ordinary things that show up when you're just trying to get through a Tuesday. I wish someone had told me these plainly before March of 2021. That's what I'm going to try to do here. 5 things. Let's take them one at a time. The first thing is this. The retirement you planned was a 2-person plan, and converting it, not emotionally, practically, takes much longer than anyone says. I want to be specific about what I mean. When Frank and I planned our retirement, we divided things without ever discussing the division. He did the spreadsheets. He tracked the accounts, monitored the investments, filed the taxes, negotiated the insurance. I planned the social calendar, managed the relationships, handled the correspondence. We had a system that worked so smoothly for so long that I had stopped being able to see it. Like a piece of machinery that runs so quietly you forget it's running. When he died, I inherited his half of the system, all at once, with no training. The first tax season after I retired, I sat down to file as a single person for the first time since 1974. Not as a widow filing jointly, as single. I knew how to use the software. I had all the documents. I had Frank's notes from the previous year. What I did not have was someone to hand it to when I was done and say, "Does this look right to you?" I called Jen. She walked me through it on the phone for 40 minutes, even though she had a meeting. She said it looked right. I said thank you. And then after I hung up, I sat at the table for a while, and I thought about how many times over 43 years I had handed something to Frank, and he had looked at it and said, "Yes, that's right," or "Almost, here's the thing you missed." And that I had completely taken for granted the fact of having someone to hand things to. That's when I figured out that being capable of doing something and being able to do it without a witness are 2 genuinely different things. I could do the taxes. What I had lost was the confirmation. Frank was the confirmer. Learning to confirm things for myself is a skill. I'm still developing it. I don't fully understand this next one, and I want to say that plainly because I've turned it over many times and I still can't completely account for it. When I retired, I expected to miss Frank in the ways I already knew. I had been missing him for 2 years by then. I had learned the shape of that, what hit me and when, what I could manage and what I couldn't. I thought I knew the territory. What I didn't expect was to miss him in new ways, retirement-specific ways, ways that hadn't been available to me before because I'd been working, and work creates its own structure that grief doesn't fully penetrate. When the work stopped, the grief had more room. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't larger, it was more present. It filled the hours differently when there were no other claims on those hours. The mornings were hardest. Frank was always up first. He made coffee while I was still waking up, and by the time I came downstairs, the house already smelled like morning, and like him, and like the day starting. I stopped drinking coffee for almost a year after he died. I've talked about this before briefly. What I haven't said is that when I retired and the mornings became fully mine, with no office to drive to and no particular time to be anywhere, I realized that my whole sense of a morning, the rhythm of it, the feeling of it, had been organized around his presence in it. I didn't have a morning routine. I had half of one, the half that came after his half. Building something entirely my own felt strange in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because wanting something for yourself, entirely for yourself, with no one to coordinate with, that's a different kind of wanting than I was used to. 43 years of what are we doing takes a while to become what am I doing? I'm not sure it fully has yet. That's when I figured out that the routine you build in retirement doesn't just replace the job. For some of us, it has to replace a person. And that's a larger project than the books describe. Now, this next one I tell with full awareness that it does not make me look particularly competent. But I think it's important, so here it is. I am a reasonably intelligent woman. I have a college degree. I ran a curriculum department for 16 years. I managed budgets and personnel and a great deal of complexity. I understand how things work. I could not fix the bathroom sink. About 6 months into retirement, the drain in the hall bathroom started running slow. Frank would have had it fixed in an afternoon. He had a methodical approach to home repair. Look at it, identify the problem, find the correct tool, fix the thing. I watched him do this for decades. I had not absorbed it. I looked at the drain. I identified that it was slow. I did not know what came next. What came next, it turned out, was YouTube. I watched 3 videos. I bought a drain snake at the hardware store, $14.99, which felt both cheap and somehow momentous. I made 2 attempts. I watched a 4th video. I made a 3rd attempt. The drain ran clear. I stood in the bathroom afterward and I felt, I want to be honest about what I felt. Not simple pride, something more complicated. I thought, Frank would have liked seeing this. And then I thought, if Frank were here, I would never have learned to do this. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I stood there holding both of them for a minute before I went to make my tea. That's when I figured out that capability in this phase of life comes with a particular quality that nobody mentions. You become good at things you wish you hadn't needed to become good at, and you're grateful and you're sad about it simultaneously. And both of those responses are reasonable, and you don't have to choose between them. The 4th thing involves Jen, and I want to say first that she is a wonderful person and a devoted daughter, and I am grateful for her every single day. Jen's way of loving someone is to organize their situation. When Frank died, she was at my house within hours. She handled the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, the meals, the phone calls. She was extraordinary. She is still extraordinary. She calls to check on me 3 or 4 times a week, and she notices everything. If I seem tired, if I mention something that doesn't sound right, if I've said something twice that might indicate I'm struggling. The part that took me a while to know how to handle is that sometimes I am entirely fine and I still receive the calls, which is its own kind of thing to navigate. It is not a complaint. It is an observation. There was a Saturday last spring when I had a genuinely good day. I worked in the yard. I had lunch with my friend Patricia from church. I came home and read for 2 hours. By evening, I was peaceful in a way that felt real. And then Jen called to check in, and I found myself, and I noticed myself doing this in real time, I found myself performing a mild version of fine rather than actual fine. Because actual fine, I have learned, sometimes worries Jen more than mild fine. Actual fine sounds like I'm not being honest. Mild fine sounds like she's helping. I told David about this on one of our Sunday calls. He laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Mom, you have to just tell her you're good." I said I knew that. He said, "Do you tell her?" I was quiet for a second. He said, "Yeah, I know." That's when I figured out that one of the hidden costs of solo retirement, the one nobody puts in the brochure, is learning to receive care in the form it arrives in, and learning to ask for the form you actually need. Both of those are their own skills. Neither of them comes naturally. And neither of them means your family isn't trying. The last one. This is the one Frank would have had the most to say about, and he probably would have said it once and expected me to have gotten it. I am more capable than I expected to be. And that surprised me, and the surprise had a complicated quality to it. I think part of me, the part I don't fully want to examine, had expected to be less capable alone than I turned out to be. Not because I thought I was incompetent, but because 43 years of partnership means some of your capability is distributed. You're good at different things. You divide without dividing. And when half of the system is gone, you expect to notice the absence more than I have. I have noticed it. I want to be clear about that. There are things I still can't bring myself to do alone. I haven't gone to the national parks yet, though I've chosen which one I'm starting with, and I have a plan. There are dinners at restaurants I haven't gone back to. There is a lot of the spreadsheet that still says "we" in the logic of it, even with Carol's name at the top. But there's also this. I fixed the sink. I drove to Charlotte and navigated the parking structure at the hospital where Jen works to meet her for lunch. Frank always drove when we went to Charlotte. I planted the back garden, which Frank had always managed. I filed 3 years of taxes. I called the insurance company when there was a billing error, and I did not hang up. I sat with the Medicare supplement forms until I understood them. I did all of this without Frank, and I did it correctly, and I am still here. The thing Frank would have said, I can hear it fairly clearly, is that he never doubted I could do these things. He would have said he always knew. And I would have said, that's easy to say now. And he would have given me the look he gave me when he thought I was being unnecessarily difficult. And we would have moved on. He was usually right. I have found this continues to be true even now. That's when I figured out that retirement, at least this version of it, is partly the long process of discovering what you can do when there's no one to do it for you. And it's slower than you'd like and more surprising than you'd expect. And some days it feels like loss, and some days it feels like something else, something that doesn't have a clean name, but that is, I think, its own kind of okay. I'm not going to tell you I have this figured out. I don't. Some weeks are harder than others, and the hard ones don't always announce themselves ahead of time. The national park list is still in the notebook. The spreadsheet still has columns Frank built for a life we were going to live together. I've updated some of them. I've left others. Frank was the planner. I was the talker. That was our system. I've had to become both, which is sometimes more than I want to do, and also somehow mine. Some days that's enough. Leave me a comment. Tell me, what's the part of retirement that surprised you most? Not the big thing, the small thing. The one that showed up on an ordinary Tuesday when you weren't expecting it. The drain that needed fixing. The tax form you stared at longer than you should have. The morning that felt wrong in a way you couldn't explain. I find those more useful than anything I've read, and I read every single one. If any of this felt familiar, hit the like button. And if you know someone who's retired alone, or planning to, or trying to figure out how to do this without the partner they thought they'd be doing it with, send this their way. These conversations matter more when more people are in them. If you want more of this, honest, unhurried retirement talk, real numbers, no performance, subscribe. That's what this channel is. I put something out every week. Okay, thanks for being here.